Chapter 5 of Red Dead Redemption. 2 is one of the most jarring tonal shifts in the entire game, and that shock is completely intentional. Everything about the Linde Gang's sudden journey to Guarma feels like a nightmare they can't wake up from, and that's because, for the first time, Dutch loses complete control. What happens in this chapter is a mixture of desperate survival, failed leadership, and the last sparks of hope within Arthur Morgan, all unfolding in an environment where nothing is familiar and nothing is safe. And that's exactly where we see what went right, and what went disastrously wrong. The first thing that went wrong is simple. The gang enters Chapter 5 already shattered. The St. Denis bank heist has failed, Hosea has been murdered, and half the gang is scattered. Dutch, Arthur, Javier, Bill, and Micah don't just escape. They're thrown into a storm, their ship goes down, and they wash up on a lawless sugar island ruled by Colonel Fusser. Guarma is built to unravel them even more. The gang can't use their usual strategies because none of their skills matter here. There's no safe house, no allies, no horses, no familiar terrain, and no way home. And for the first time since Coulter, Dutch is not improvising brilliantly. He's improvising desperately. But even in the middle of disaster, something actually does go right. Arthur, still reeling from everything at St. Denis, starts to step into a leadership role, not with words, but with action. He becomes the one the workers trust. He's the one shielding the people enslaved on the plantation. He's the one negotiating with the rebels and fighting beside them. What's remarkable is how much clarity Arthur gains in the most chaotic environment in the game. His compassion becomes a strength, and Guarma showcases that better than any chapter before it. Meanwhile, Dutch begins slipping even faster. At first he promises they'll escape, regroup, and get home, but by the time he meets the rebels, something changes. Instead of focusing on escape, he gets swept up in the cause. Not out of loyalty, out of ego. He starts talking about freedom, new lives, and fresh starts, sounding eerily like the Dutch we know later in the epilogue. He becomes captivated by the idea of another revolution he can control. And while the gang fights alongside the rebels out of necessity, Dutch begins fighting because he enjoys the feeling of power again. This shift is subtle, but it's one of the biggest signs the old Dutch is disappearing for good. One of the smartest things the gang does in Chapter 5, maybe the only thing that truly goes right, is forming an alliance with Hercule and the revolutionaries. Without Hercule, they never would have had the manpower or resources to escape the island. For the gang, this isn't ideological, it's survival. But even this decision has consequences. Dutch becomes emotionally charged and reckless, and it's Arthur who has to pull him back from the worst decisions. Micah, meanwhile, is quietly manipulating Dutch more than ever. Guarma is where Micah fully cements his position as Dutch's new right hand, and Arthur becomes painfully aware of how dangerous that influence is. As the chapter continues, the gunfights become more chaotic, mirroring Dutch's unraveling mindset. When the gang finally reaches the ship that will take them back to the mainland, it feels less like a victory and more like an escape from a collapsing world. And yet, Guarma leaves them worse off than before. They arrive back home to find the gang divided, resources gone, the Pinkertons closing in, and morale at an all-time low. The only thing they bring back with them is exhaustion, trauma, and Dutch's increasingly unstable leadership. But Chapter 5 does something important. It strips the Linde Gang of illusions. Arthur finally sees Dutch not as the visionary leader he once admired, but as a frightened man clinging to a dying dream. He sees Micah's rising influence. He sees how fractured the gang truly is. And he sees that coming home doesn't mean healing. It means facing everything they ran from. The tragedy of Chapter 5 is that nothing the gang does there really matters in the long run. They survive, they fight, they escape. But all Guarma does is accelerate the end that's already coming. It breaks Dutch mentally, empowers Micah, isolates Arthur, and leaves the gang with fewer resources, fewer allies, and no direction. In a strange way, the best thing that happens in Chapter 5 is simply that Arthur comes home with a clear understanding of the truth. The gang is dying, Dutch is slipping, and the world is changing faster than anyone can stop. And by the time the gang returns to Beaver Hollow, the audience knows something the characters are only just beginning to realize. There is no coming back from Guarma. It's the chapter where things stop going wrong by accident and start going wrong because of the people the gang has become. In those final moments of Chapter 5, the most important shift happens inside Arthur himself. Surrounded by chaos, betrayal, and loss, he realizes that the old life, the outlaw dream Dutch preached, is already dead. Guarma forces him to see that survival isn't about loyalty to Dutch anymore. It's about choosing what kind of man he wants to be before it's too late. And when the gang steps off that ship and returns to the mainland,